1 minute.
Ron's on.
So the run the face is on when you're ready. When you go on to run the face.
Megan's too.
I would like to resume the April 20th, 2021 workshop, and the agenda item next is the update from our legislative lobbyist.
All right, thank you very much. Today we should have Megan Fay and Ron LaFace on the line. Are you all on the line right now?
We are here.
Oh, hello, Ron and Megan. Good to hear from you today. We appreciate it, and we're looking forward to your update.
Okay. Yeah, and are we being projected in video, or is it just our voice?
Yes, you're being projected in video, and this is a board workshop.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Well, I'll go ahead, if it's okay, and kick off a little report, and then we can certainly have some dialogue and some questions back and forth. But as you all are aware, we're in the final stretch of the 2021 session. With 2 weeks to go, both bills and budget conference are starting to take shape. And at this point, I do anticipate that we will have an on-time finish next Friday. A couple of bills that are positioned to pass or have had some significant action in the last week or so that I wanted to cover. First one is there were a number of charter school bills filed this session, and it's really taken until the last 2 or 3 weeks of session to kind of figure out which bills we're going to move and what pieces from other bills were going to be added as they moved into the last 2 weeks. And I do think that we're going to see a charter school bill that will likely pass, although it still has some hurdles to make, that really just kind of touches on district charter school approval and process and term limits. For example, the bill would or take away districts' ability to require applications be submitted by certain dates, would allow for prevailing party attorney's fees if a charter wins a dispute at the State Board of Education, or whoever wins the dispute would get prevailing party attorney's fees. If a district weren't to follow an appellate court decision on a charter dispute, then it would reduce the administrative fee to 1%. That's an issue that specifically is occurring in Volusia that the legislature intends to fix. And one of the most important pieces, I think, in the charter district relationship is currently districts have the ability to immediately terminate a charter if there is a serious danger to students. And there's language that's added to that termination ability that would say not only does the district have to show that there is a serious danger that does exist for students, but that serious danger is also likely to continue. So I did want you guys to note that change, and we'll certainly include that if it does pass in our report. But one of the biggest kind of policy changes that's in the charter bills that I see that are moving is it would allow universities and colleges to authorize and sponsor charter schools if they address workforce demands. So it would be an additional authorizer and sponsor. But if a university and college, as I mentioned, did sponsor a charter school, they would be responsible as basically the LEA for that charter and oversee them and actually have the charter contract. And the university or college charter would not be counted or included in the district's school grade. There is another provision that allows for a statewide alternative authorizer where the state would establish a commission, and they would approve charter applications and then turn them over to the districts to then contract and sponsor with the charter. But I do not believe that that provision is going to be included, at least at this point. So it's going to be focused more on the university and college authorizer. Another issue that I wanted to bring up that I know has been in the press is the Bright Futures revisions. I think it's Senate Bill 86 that the Senate was proposing. At this time, we do not see that bill being enacted. The Senate has stopped really pushing that bill because of some of the outcry that they have seen. But we do have a Bright Futures issue that has come up in the budget conference. The House is proposing to remove the Bright Futures textbook stipend for academic scholars. Each scholar gets about $600 a year to help them with textbooks. It's about a $37 million state spend, and the House is proposing to eliminate that. Another issue that I wanted to mention to you, because Sarasota does have impact fees, is there is a push by the home builders to affect the way that counties and local governments, including school districts, increase impact fees in the future. And the bill that's moving through the process that I do believe will end up passing basically restricts increasing impact fees unless they are phased in over a period of time. It does have I would call it kind of an escape valve in that you still could increase your impact fees around the phase-in if the local government or the district demonstrated that it has a new study that justifies the impact fees. And also the new study shows why you wouldn't have to phase in the increases over a period of time, that the county have 2 workshops on it and has a 2/3 vote. One of the issues that we worked on with this is their original version did not allow for districts to collect impact fees for transportation or school buses, but that issue has been resolved. So if that's a portion of our impact fees, then that can continue. Megan, did you want to pick up a bill or two?
Sure. So the first thing I want to kind of talk about is the school choice proposal. Both the House and the Senate versions are moving on to consideration by the floor and their respective chambers. The House bill is on second reading today, and there was a good amount of question especially from the Democrats in the chamber about the bills. I will say the Senate bill is on special order for tomorrow, and there's been a delete everything amendment that's been filed onto the bill. This essentially takes the House version of the school choice bill and replaces the Senate's provisions with the House bill. And so just as a kind of a refresher, the House bill, which looks like it's going to be the bill that's agreed upon and passed by both chambers, it essentially eliminates the Gardner-McKay scholarships and includes students with disabilities in the Family Empowerment Scholarship while maintaining the Hope Scholarship and the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship. The Florida Empowerment Scholarship would be the one that's paid out of state funds through the FEFP. The others would remain tax credit funded. And only students with disabilities would have access to that education savings account. The Senate bill, as you'll recall, back at the beginning of session, we had briefed you on Senate Bill 48, and that did go quite a bit further to authorize education savings accounts for all students in all scholarship programs. But there's been a lot of feedback, a lot of discussion about both the ESAs and the expansion of the income level. The Senate bill allowed the income to grow very rapidly and within 10 years to be almost $500,000 a family for qualifying students. But the House bill is honestly much more conservative than the Senate bill, and so it takes most of those provisions out. And while it does expand our choice programs, it does so at a much more conservative pace. And so that those will be up on the floor this week and likely to pass. And then another bill that I want to put on your radar was something that it was discussed in the Rules Committee in the Senate yesterday, kind of at length. There were several amendments. It is involuntary examinations of minors by Senator Harrell, and it essentially puts more controls and requirements into the process of school districts when they Baker Act a student. And so essentially the bill requires the school to make an attempt to notify a student's parent or guardian prior to the student's removal from the school for an involuntary assessment under the Baker Act. The debated provision that did end up going onto the bill, but in kind of a watered down form because of feedback from, particularly from the Sheriff's Association, is that the school district or the law enforcement officer has to attempt to get the student in front of a mental health professional for an evaluation before they're taken off the school premises for the involuntary evaluation under the Baker Act. The original language would have required that, and Senator Jeff Brandes spoke very strongly in support of that, but it ultimately ended up becoming more of a reasonableness standard as far as you have to take, best efforts to try to get the student in front of a mental health professional. And there's definitely been some discussion of using telehealth to do that, knowing that not all school districts have a licensed mental health professional on their campus. And I think that is all for policy bills. Ron, do you want to touch on anything else?
Yeah, I also wanted to mention the language that's may be enacted. It's kind of moving through the process, but it would allow high-performing school districts to basically use up to 2 of their planning days for virtual education. The thought is that we have certain planning days throughout the years for teachers, but if a district was inclined and they submitted a plan to the department, they could on up to 2 of those teaching days not lose the instructional day and move the kids to a virtual day that was kind of prepared by their teacher and sequenced with what they were doing that week in class. But it would theoretically be a way for a district to regain 2 teaching days, which otherwise would be just planning days with no instruction. And the language has been worked out with the departments, and so now it's just kind of a wait and see if it can be attached to a bill that will ultimately make it. And then finally, we began budget conference on Friday and had the silos, the subcommittee silos, K through 12 in particular, meet over the weekend and try to work out their budget differences. There's no decisions on K-12 funding. The entire budget got bumped to the chairs, the appropriation chairs last night. There's some disagreement between the House and the Senate on the use of the federal funds. There's some effort by the House to use some of those funds into the state's FEFP. The Senate does not believe that that's allowed under federal law. I think the Senate is probably reading that correctly as we understand it, but that's the issue that has caused that budget to be bumped up to the chairs and possibly to the presiding officers. The House did make an FEFP proposal and the Senate made a proposal back. Both of them had increases in the base student allocation. I think the House's proposal was $60. The Senate's proposal was $80. I wouldn't put too much credence in those numbers right now because with the budgets not being worked out, you don't really know whether that's money they intend to put into the base student allocation or whether that's money that they have for other purposes. They just haven't spent it yet. And the House does collapse some categoricals in their proposal, like the turnaround categorical and the ESE categorical. And so that's, money that is funded in the FEFP, just tied up in a categorical. And if you get rid of the categorical, then it will show up in the base. So the collapse of those categoricals does account for some of the House's base increase. But both chambers are taking the total value of the required local effort, which is, a change that we've been working on for many years. So there's no rollback in either budget. And I do believe that—
Good afternoon. We are, I'm calling the committee meeting back into order.
Oh, I'm sorry. Megan, go ahead and take up. I need to turn off the Florida channel.
18,
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I thought that was coming from the other side. So both chambers are allowing the required local effort to grow. With the value of the real estate market, they will not be rolling it back. As Ron was saying, the other budget piece that has been agreed upon by both chambers is the FRS increase, and so the FRS increase for all school districts statewide will be about $134 million, which is a substantial amount of money, but it is about half of what they did last year. So we've talked at length about this issue with a lot of people, both members and staff, and I think that we made some significant progress with them in understanding how taking smaller bites of that apple while still maintaining, the health of the pension fund is a middle ground that everyone can live with.
Yeah, and I apologize for that. I was streaming the Senate Rules Committee on the Florida channel, and they were in a recess, and they got back together, and so that's what you heard for a second. The final budget item to mention is that reading initiative pilot that we've spoken about. It does seem that both chambers are going to approve the pilot. The amount of funding that will be included has not yet been decided, but it would be, at least at this point, a minimum of $300,000 per district. And, certainly Sarasota continues to be a district that would be included in the pilot. So more to come on that. And we hope to have some final budget decisions in the coming days, and we'll certainly report those as they occur.
Thank you. Jane, you have a question, a comment?
Thank you very much for your hard work, and I know you'll be working long days this week. But I wanted to know about the transgender bill. I understand that it had hit a rocky spot. The sports, the female athletic legislation that passed in the House. I'd heard that hit a rocky spot in the Senate.
Yes, it did today. It was, in order to testify in the Senate, you have to go down to the Donald Tucker Civic Center, which is a couple blocks away from the Capitol, and it looked like people were showing up, for a sporting event, the line outside of the Tucker Center, and a lot of the people were set to testify on that. The bill was temporarily postponed, where it means that it was not being heard, and Senator Stargell, who is the Senate sponsor of it, announced today that she doesn't really, with the budget conference going on, she doesn't think she has the time that she needs to devote to getting that bill across the finish line. So for all intensive purposes, we think at this point that it will not be moved out of the Senate. But, certainly there's still, a week and a couple of days to go, so anything can happen.
And my other question was, and what about term limits for school board members?
So there are, how I would kind of characterize that one is, there was a resolution in the House that basically eliminated school board salaries. That resolution has been changed to now just establish, put before the voters, term limits for school board members, which since it is a constitutional issue, does, we believe, need to be approved by voters in order for it to be enacted.
Right.
There is no Senate sponsor for that, and we haven't seen any interest on the Senate side on establishing the term limits. But in the House Charter Bill, and I meant to mention this, so I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah.
The House did add term limits to their version of the charter school bill in statute,
Which is
I'm
odd
not sure
place for it.
is allowed. But as we understand, the Senate is not interested in that. So if the House insists on it, it may end up taking down the charter school bill. But there's 2 weeks left, so anything's possible. But I would say, my forecast is that there will not be legislation on term limits for school board members, but none of that has been finalized.
Yeah, I understand. I don't know if it was over this bill, the term limits or what, but I understand there was a representative in committee berating school boards and saying how much he hates his school board, which is kind of awkward. Somebody was saying they were watching today in the legislature and saw that, and I'm like, oh my goodness. I guess it just kind of shows we're not always on the same page. I think it's, do you know what the total dollar amount is on the FRS? You said that there's $134 million in new funding, but how much of that funding is going to the FRS?
The $134 million is the cost increase to all 67 school districts for your increased employer contribution this year. So I believe last year it was like $230 million spread across the school districts. So it was a very substantial increase. This year it is still a substantial increase, but it is about half of what it was last year. And it is an increased cost the district will have to plan for.
Yeah, and I do think that's important to note, that I'm glad we're bringing that back out. So the state's actuaries are recommended that the state increase the districts and the state's cost, everybody's cost who participates in the FRS, by the same amount that they did last year. And they feel that they need that because of the agencies and the bond agencies to get that rate of return to where it's supposed to be. So the recommended increase to school districts statewide was $238 million. The legislature, because of COVID, basically took the opportunity to cut that number in half. So in effect, to themselves as well as school boards, they're only increasing it half the amount that they were supposed to increase it this year. So, it's a roundabout way to say that that's kind of a win. We don't have to pay as much, but ultimately, this funding for the FRS is going to continue. These costs are going to increase each year until they get the FRS in a sound position on the rate of return that the fund is actually making off of its investments.
And I would again, ask them, why don't you look at how quickly elected officials get to be vested in the system and the percent that's given to elected officials, because, it's a pretty rich retirement plan, especially, as it meets those who are voting on these increases. They need to be looking at, the benefits they're getting from it, and perhaps looking at that. I appreciate all you're doing up there for us. I personally am glad I'm not there, and and I know the transgender bill in sports was getting a lot, but I know that the Florida High School Athletic Association already has written parameters on how that's to handle. And if they were to pass that bill, the NCAA was coming in saying they're going to, pull any championships. So, I think we have enough on our plate. They don't need to be adding more negativity to our districts.
Madam Chair, Mitzi has a question.
So, but I appreciate what you're doing, and I think that we'll definitely have to have workshops on, the changes in the impact fee and how that's going to affect us, and also that Baker Act funding. I'd like to know, the Baker Act changes, I'd like to know exactly how they're going to do, and then how we're going to be training our staff on how to enact those changes, both of our police department and our counselors and our administrators. After that passes, so I'm definitely watching that bill. And any other questions, comments? Mitzi?
Hi, Ron and Megan. I just have a couple of quick questions. So I received a copy of the House Proviso language, and it seemed to vary from the most recent, version of an FEFP run. Do you happen to have a copy or know where I can find a copy of the Senate's proposal with an FEFP run on it? Because I hadn't heard anything about any Senate proposals. I knew the House had done an offer, but hadn't seen the Senate's offer. Because originally the Senate was staying, the same. The BSA wasn't changing, and now I'm hearing it's maybe $80. So I'd just like to see in general what that might be, if there's anything available on that.
Mitzi, I can send you that.
Perfect. Thank you. And then the FRS increase, do you know which rate was agreed upon, the 10.66 or the 10.84 on the overall for the regular class? Or can you just give me the bill reference?
But I can send you the chart with all the FRS rates.
Okay, perfect. That's great.
I send you the FEFP.
Yeah, we just want to incorporate whatever's been agreed upon into our budget, so that would be great. I think that's
Absolutely.
Pretty much all I had. Those were kind of the two big areas. Thank you very much.
Dr. Asplin, do you have any questions or comments?
Just one thing, going back to the Baker Act issue, and I know that with mental health, that's a huge issue right now. In an effort to serve our students properly, Ron and Megan, I believe at this point in time, if a student is Baker Acted from their home, for instance, I know that confidentiality piece, we may never know that as a school system when we work with students when they come back. Is there anything that is being looked at all to say, hey parents, if this happens at your home, please make sure you're letting someone at the school system know so we can properly serve the student. Is there anything about that?
I have not heard any discussion about that, but that's definitely seems like an important component. So we can certainly raise that to the bill sponsors as they're discussing this issue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this bill is a work in progress for sure. I mean, I would say it barely made it out of the Senate committee yesterday. and there were issues about, the age of a child that could be Baker acted, as well as the notification piece. So we'll certainly, bring this up and try to get it on the radar screen. And the issue, just to make sure I understand it, is if a student who enrolls in public school district has been Baker acted, that the parent have a duty to inform, somebody at the school district, in a confidential, student record type way of that incident. Is that what you would like to?
Yes,
like to see?
that's correct, Ron. We keep track of all of that information. We know who's been Baker acted, out of our school system during the school day, even with parent contact and so on, and following the proper policy. But then we have a large number. As we find out, we can only track the number of times a parent actually tells us that their student was Baker acted from their home, and it seems to be a large number. But as we know, that number is much bigger because parents do not need to really tell us that. Not that we're looking for that information for any other purpose except to properly serve their students. So yes, anything that happens at home in that sense, how can we help them at school if we don't know the issues that have occurred so that we can help them?
Got it. We will get to work on it.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions or comments? Again, we thank you for your report. We thank you for watching out for us and advocating on our issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Chair, our next item is the face mask policy and discussion about next school year. Jody Dumas is going to talk to us about the face mask policy to begin with here.
All right. Well, thank you very much and good afternoon. As you know, our face mask policy that you debated at the start of the school year is set to expire on June 30, our emergency policy that you put in place. And so as we move closer to certainly summer school, which spans 4 weeks, 2 weeks in June and 2 weeks in July, and then certainly into the start of the school year, we wanted to have the conversation with you about what you think that masks policy needs to be as we move forward through the end of the year. So in order to have that conversation today, I believe Michael Drennan from the Health Department, I got a thumbs up, is online on Zoom to be able to provide some input, certainly from their perspective. And then I had a chance to talk to Dr. Gordillo, as you know, who's kind of been the resident expert in Sarasota County regarding masks and everything COVID related. And so he was not able to attend today, but I did get to have a good conversation with him yesterday and kind of get his thoughts on where we are as a community moving forward into the summer, and then certainly as we look forward to the start of the school year. So with that, I guess I would open it up for conversation about what you think the mask policy might be as we move forward, and prepared to certainly answer any questions as you have that conversation.
Well, I think we probably, would imagine, maybe the number of our staff that are already vaccinated, and I don't know how many of the students are getting vaccinated. Are we notified, or we don't know when students are vaccinated?
No, we don't. And we don't know with staff either, right? Because at the end of the day, that's a confidentiality thing with medical information. We do know we've offered, I believe it was 3 rounds of vaccination opportunities for staff, and we had quite a few staff take advantage of that. But again, a lot are going to...
And now they can just walk up to the sites. I mean, I don't know what kind of waiting time, but I don't hear that there's a big wait to go in.
So I'm not sure if Michael can comment on what that's looked like since we've gone to walk up. Michael?
Yeah, so if, excellent question, as any resident in Sarasota that's over the age of 18 walks up to our mall site, the wait time, probably a little longer first thing in the morning, and then usually around lunch, and by longer I mean probably something around 30 minutes or less. But as we've transitioned to out of appointments and just open to the general community for walk-up, the demand has decreased. So definitely not a long wait time if someone wanted to go to the mall clinic site. And just to remind everyone, that's an exclusively Moderna vaccine that we have there.
Thank you. Bridget?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for joining us. A couple of questions, and I'm going to be consistent. So for the current moment, can you give us an update of our community positivity rate, our hospitalizations, ICUs, and the current rate of mortality?
Most of those I can answer.
Okay.
I don't have current rate of mortality, but I can tell you it is significantly less than where we were earlier in the year and even going back into last year. Current rate of positivity, so for the day, today or yesterday, the percent positive was 6.88, and for 14 days is right at 6%. Much lower than where we were last year, but that's increased from where we were in February when we got down to about 3.5%. So we're kind of going in the wrong direction right now. Not entirely sure what's driving this, but you know, we've been doing this for a long time, so that's part of it. The other piece would be hospitalizations. Those numbers have not gone away completely, but they're also significantly less than we were earlier this year and even last year.
So when we talk, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one other thing. One of the driving factors, at least in Sarasota County, with hospitalizations and death was age, specifically amongst individuals over the age of 65. And we've seen a very robust response or demand for vaccine amongst that age group. I think we're right around 85% of the population in Sarasota over the age of 65 has received at least one dose of the vaccine. Not everyone has got to their second dose date yet, so I imagine we'll get close to that number as well. That's one of the pieces that's driving our hospitalizations down. Like I said, we still have those occurring. We still have individuals in the ICU, but it's much less than where we were a couple months ago.
So, and the reason I ask that is certainly as we evaluate moving ahead for next year, but you know, if I take us back, one of the main things is we didn't know as a country, you know, a lot at the beginning, but the key driver for some of the lockdown aspects was not to overrun our hospitals, and we, you know, keeping capacities available there because there's a ripple effect. And so as we've talked about metrics, I understand that that's not likely going to be something I'll be provided here today. But as we've learned in the past year, is it safe to say that while we may have an uptick in positivity rate, the severity of these is dramatically decreased?
Yes, that would be a correct statement. And to build on that, if I may, I would say part of that is knowledge of the disease, and so medical care is improved, and Dr. Gordillo can speak much more to that than I can. And the other piece would be as we vaccinated of what at least locally was, and much of the rest of the state and country, the population with highest risk, not to say that the entire population doesn't have some risk, but those over 65 appear to be at the highest risk for a negative outcome. Those numbers have decreased and have improved, yes.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I have a number of questions, but I want to be fair to other board members. So if you want to come back to me, is that, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, we'll let Jane ask,
Okay.
and we'll come back to you. Jane?
So in talking about a mask policy, which is what everybody is watching and looking at us doing today, I can tell you that I am not ready to change our mask policy. I think it's too far out from the beginning of school of next year, and we have to wait and see, because we had 151 new cases on April the 18th. They may not be as severe, but there's the whole overarching aspect of the variants that we're finding, and the B117 is expected to impede, if you will, a lot of the other variants that they're seeing from both Brazil and South Africa. And if that happens, it impacts younger children. And of course, most of the testing that I understand is taking place with younger children getting vaccinated. We're looking out until next fall at best before we would have any vaccines available for them. Right now, we're looking at a 16 and over population. Is there anything that you know in the relative years of 12 to 16 that's being done in the state of Florida?
In the state of Florida, no. My understanding is that both Moderna and Pfizer are currently evaluating the effectiveness of the vaccine in individuals 12 and older. Where it stands in that process, I do not know, but that's my understanding. They're looking at if these vaccines will be effective in that population, also looking at potential side effects.
In my conversation with Dr. Gordillo, he also had mentioned that also regarding 12 to 16-year-olds, that is being evaluated at this point, although he did not at this time had a timeline either.
Jody, can you tell us, I know we can look it up, but off the top of your head, what's the total number of students?
I cannot. I apologize. I'd have to look it up.
I have it up right now if you'd want.
Yeah, what's
Please.
the total number of students so far?
Are we
today?
talking, since August, which this is
Right, since August.
aggregate,
School
which is
started.
almost, it's just a totality, doesn't really give us a sense of where we're at right now, but total staff positive since August 31st is 373. That's the entire school year. And total students since August 31st is 1,480. That's out of non-charter schools, so approximately 35,800, give or take. And I say 5,000 students. But if you look at from a positivity rate, we have to look at the 14 days, which where we're at right now is current staff. Sorry, I'm looking at the current staff positive and isolated is 8 right now, which is 0.00007 something percent, and current students positive and isolated are 80 out of, again, 35,800. I'm rounding here, so we're at a point where we're far below community spread. We're underneath 1% from our school district population, and that's been consistent trend throughout the entire year.
Thank you. Do you have any other? You also
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've got.
Go ahead.
Yep. Michael, a question. So I know that the variance is certainly something all of us are watching, and I know there's discussions as to the efficacy of the vaccinations with the new variants, and it's a very much wait and see, and I think that's the way it's going to work anyway, because we're still in a trial period. Is Michael still there? I'm looking at myself, but.
I'm still here.
Okay, and I think that it's the B117. Isn't that's one of the strains that they're stating is more contagious, again, but we're not seeing the severity of illness, and I think there's a number of variables to that reason, which you indicated before. But my understanding is the B117 is the dominant strain right now in Florida. Is that correct?
That is correct. Both Florida and the United States, the B117 is the one that seems to have overtaken what would have been the original strain. This is more commonly referred to, or not more commonly, but also referred to as the UK variant. It seems to be that the vaccines are somewhat effective against this variant. We just don't know how effective at this time. And as you said, some of that's just these vaccines weren't originally tested against that variant. So we're kind of looking at breakthrough cases that occur after someone's been vaccinated and what strain of the virus they have.
Bridget, we're not as technical as you. Is the B117 the UK variant?
Is that the Brazil? I'm going to ask.
No, it's the UK variant.
UK, okay. So, and the reason I asked it because they're being thrown around, and my understanding as I've evaluated this is that's become the dominant strain in the U.S. and Florida for some months now. Is that correct?
I don't believe it's been quite 2 months yet. It's been for the past several weeks.
Okay.
For sure.
And I think just as we look at data and the percentages and we compare that just put for context, I want to put that in because as we look ahead, I mean, certainly a lot of these there's unknowns. I mean, look at last year. We didn't know anything really. And now we have a year behind us. And so, but there are elements that we have, I just want to make sure we're evaluating the information accurately because I certainly understand Mrs. Goodwin's point, and I do understand that there's that nerve-wracking aspect of we don't know, but I go back to we know way more than we did before. I think the part of the severity aspect, the fact that our medical professionals know better how to treat these, how to identify it earlier on, has made a significant impact on the ability to recover from this illness in conjunction with the vaccination distribution. And so I find ourselves in a completely different place. I think it'll be no surprise to anyone on this board and certainly the community, but I would very much like to see us move towards a optional face mask circumstance. I think that we continue to evaluate, the circumstances, but in my opinion, if you look at this year and when we didn't know much, and you look at we didn't have the transmission rates in the schools as many were concerned that we would have, so that's a great outcome, and that's a testament to the hard work that our staff has done and the information. But I also think that, and I know there's this concern as if we get rid of face masks that will change. I would argue that there are a number of places that don't have that, and they haven't seen an outbreak in the same aspect. So a lot of it goes down to the population and the protocols and the age and the risk factors there. So can you speak to some of those elements as far as the age, risk factors, and the recovery? Because ultimately, if you're wearing a face mask or not, the protocol from quarantining is you still have to quarantine. We're still seeing those. Go ahead. I didn't know if you were going to say something. So
you're exactly right. Quarantine doesn't change with masking. Quarantine does change with vaccines. So if an individual has been vaccinated, it's been at least 2 weeks since they've completed a vaccine series, they no longer are required to quarantine. So we definitely want to make sure that that message is out there and people understand that component. But at this time, masking does not change the quarantine process.
Okay. And so I think the population recognizes that masks are a good mitigation tool, but as policymakers, we have to weigh a number of things. And again, I think particularly I've always focused on the lower elementary side because I think there are elements there that are impactful to their academic learning. But again, I go back to where we started, the severity aspects. We're seeing substantial declines, substantial. I mean, we're nowhere near that, where I think, and so I think we are at the time and point where we need to signal to our community what direction we're going so that they can make those decisions and we can plan accordingly. So I would like to see us make it optional. I'm not sure from a legal standpoint we would have to adopt a policy that would just cite that is optional. But that's the direction I'd like to go. I also think that we certainly can continue to evaluate it. Nothing is hard, everything is subject to change no matter what we do. But I certainly think it helps the community get a better sense of where we're going from a directional standpoint. I do have one additional question as it pertains to vaccines. And I have tried to do a lot of research on this to find out how is it right now. For example, we have the Department of Health indicates the vaccine schedule for requirement to enroll in school from, we do registration. Who determines what's on that, which vaccinations are required? MMR is one that I can think of, or I think TB. Can you talk to us about that process? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that. I believe the vaccine schedule is developed at the state level, and I don't believe it's through the Bureau of Epidemiology. I believe it's probably a partnership between the Department of Education and Department of Health, but I don't know for sure. I could find out and let you know, but I know it's not specifically the Bureau of Epi.
Okay, because I know that there's been discussions about that, and so and I have not been able to clarify who makes that decision. I know it's been a very long time since anything's been added. I am not, by the way, advocating that we add this to the schedule. But for example, flu is not one that is required, but certainly there are vaccinations and boosters every year for people for flu, which also has various strains and different variants each year as well. So I know they're a little different, but from a policymaking standpoint, I just wanted some clarification on that.
I will find that answer for you.
Thank you.
You brought up, that the children aren't getting as sick, and of course, getting sick is an issue that we have concern with. But if somebody comes down with COVID, they're out for 14 days. And so are the kids that are around them out those days. And it's those days off of school that I think we need to be considerate of, and not just, being sick, but all those kids that are quarantined, because those days can add up. And again, when we talk about a blanket policy, a mandatory policy, I think we've seen that we've had some schools that have had very few incidences. So perhaps, if it seems to go into a school, we might want to notify the parents that, it would probably be a good thing to wear your mask, or I don't know if we could even do it on a school-by-school basis. But there's surely definitely some schools that have not had a problem. And I know I've been in a classroom and with the mask on and the thing, because when I'm watching you on TV, when you're on the news and you've got your mask on, I can't understand what you're saying sometimes. So I can see, both sides of this, but it's the number of days these kids are off school that I'm also worried about. Tom?
Yeah, Mrs. Ziegler touched on this a little bit, but my understanding is that the variants are significantly more contagious amongst children, and that's my research. And so, and Florida in and of itself, last I heard, was number one, but for a long time it was one of the top 5 in terms of states that have the most variant. So, and that I'm a little disappointed. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to Dr. Cardillo, and to kind of get his sense, because when I wasn't here for the institution of the mask policy, but certainly followed it, and have been paying close attention as I have visited schools and. But my understanding, at least from my perspective, is that, yes, I want to make sure that our hospital is not overloaded and all those things, but at the end of the day, I'm really concerned about the safety and the health of our children. So I'm looking at it from the variant perspective as, is it more contagious, and and again, I've heard the severity amongst that is changing. So that's one thing. The second thing, and I don't think Michael can answer this question, but maybe somebody up here. I reached out to the union to see if they thought how teachers felt about this, because when the policy was enacted, teachers were very vocal and that they were. I haven't heard anything. The union couldn't give me any information. Does anyone here have any information about how the teachers feel about it?
That probably gives me to Dr. Brennan, who is the next on here. Did you have another question after that?
I could come back. Come back.
Brennan?
Yes, I just have a few things. First of all, about knowing where the teachers are with that, I do not know. We'd have to send a survey out and find out what, how they feel about it. I know that just talking to teachers at schools and in hallways, I get both sides of that. Some teachers really want the masks to go away. Some teachers are really care to have the mask remain, depending on who you talk to. So, but as far as percentages are concerned, I don't have that information at this point. Just a couple of other items, Do you want to go over to Tom? Okay. So the policy sunsets on June 30th, as you know, and summer school runs 2 weeks before the 4th of July week and 2 weeks after 4th of July week. And right now we have, obviously students signing up for summer school and so forth. We're talking to parents and students about that, and then also trying to get our teachers to work in the summer. And, most of our teachers are pretty burnt out, or will be burnt out, and they just, most of them who used to teach summer school do not want to because they're just burned out. And so just trying to fill those slots has been difficult up to this point, and we're continuing to work on that. My original thought, if you asked me last month when I was talking with the cabinet about the mask policy, part of what we talked about was, look, the mask policy sunsets June 30th. That's halfway through the summer school session. So then what if when it sunsets, then it becomes an optional situation going into the second part of summer school, see how it goes. That'll help us leading into next year and have a good feel for it. Then I know we kind of spiked over the last 2-3 weeks here, and which would indicate maybe, and the fact that we're still trying to find enough teachers for summer school, it might be a good idea to extend the mask policy through July 30th, which would extend it through the second half of summer, which we're only talking 2 weeks, at least so that we know that our teachers who are signing up, since they think we are going to have masks all the way through at this point in time, I'm afraid if I made it optional the last half, I might lose more teachers in the summer. So to complete summer school and get through this, knowing that we had a spike, it might be a good idea to extend the policy 1 month to, let's say, July 30th, and then from there, make it an optional situation depending on what's going on in the school system. And then obviously going into next year, and I'm glad Michael's still on here, because going into next year, we really want next year to be back to normal. You want everything to be back to normal, which means face-to-face, and we have our virtual school, which we've always had our virtual school as an option. And so we really want to move in that direction. And so one of the questions that has come up so that we can put a sunset on the whole concurrent teaching method. Nobody wants that anymore. None of us do. If we have a quarantine situation, Michael, going into next year, if a student tests positive or gets sick and they stay home as if, they have the flu, and we use our policies that we've always had in place, that's one thing. But if we have to quarantine, 50 students in one chunk, and they're at home, and we don't supply them with the concurrent teaching, and they're not sick, and it's 2 weeks, we're trying to figure out how we're going to handle that situation, knowing we do not want a concurrent situation, have remote learning in that type of instructional delivery. So, Michael, one question I had for you is, when we talk to the Department of Health about quarantining, I know that will, hopefully going into next year, that will have mostly to do with our determination as a school system as far as who is quarantined or who is not quarantined so that we can move forward, or is that something the Department of Health has a large hand in?
As it stands now, it is something that we would have a large hand in. So the process of isolation and quarantine of individuals exposed to communicable disease falls under the purview of the Department of Health. And those current guidelines say that anyone exposed to a person who has tested positive needs to quarantine. And that's for that. There's multiple options there. The one that we've been trying to use with everyone, but especially in the school system, is the 7 days and then test negative and then return back. But as it stands now, that all falls under Department of Health.
Okay. And I know we're a good three and a half.
To my knowledge, nothing has been brought to my attention that guidance is going to change, in the near future.
Okay.
It will change. I just don't know when.
All right. And as I was saying, we are still three and a half months away from next school year, so we'll have to see how that goes. But I will tell you, we have every intention of starting the school year as a normal school year, so we'll have to work through all of that. And then you heard my thoughts on masking. Again, throwing it out there that it does sunset on the 30th. We do have summer school, and we are trying to fill our summer school slots. I just want to be careful with that. If we didn't have the spike over the last 3 weeks, maybe it would have been very easy to go into an optional last 2 weeks of summer school. But I thought I'd put that out on the table for discussion as well.
Mr. Dumas, can you please share what our medical doctor partner had to say that has not been part of this conversation yet?
Yes, absolutely. So in my conversation with Dr. Gordillo, he kind of echoed what's been saying here, but certainly some of the things that Michael has said from the health department perspective, that his viewpoint at this point is that as long as the current rate of vaccination continues, because he's been very positive about the number, certainly, of elderly people who have been vaccinated in the community, as long as that continues and we continue to move in a positive direction with that, it makes a lot of sense as we transition into the school year to go to a voluntary mask program. He would say, though, that probably needs to be revisited sometime over the summer as we get closer for a couple of reasons. If the rate of vaccination slows down, or if one of the variants kind of takes more of a prominent role in the community, that certainly would be something to be considered. But again, he said it's a little early for him to be kind of given that guidance, but if he had to at this point, as long as we stay on the current trajectory, he would be comfortable with a voluntary mask program to start the school year. But again, would like to see us revisit it as we got closer, just in case things change.
Madam Chair, may I continue? Thank you very much. I think that is a very important piece for me, coming from a school community medical professional perspective. And also, Dr. Asplin, am I understanding you correctly when you are stating that your recommendation or thoughts are to open up the school year as a normal school year? I think that's something to be considered in partnership with the medical advice. I think that in revisiting it, I think families right now want to know what our goals are. And if anything that we've learned about the pandemic and COVID over the last year, that we have to go with the variables at hand, and they do change. But I think that we owe it to our community to set an expectation, and that medical piece is extraordinarily important to me, and I think it was very viable advice. And I'd like to ask the Department of Health, you stated that you would still be overseeing quarantine. And that, you don't know in the foreseeable future when that might shift to schools. Do you know what the variable is that would initiate that shift away from the Department of Health?
Isolation and quarantine is always part of the Department of Health's process. We use it for a host of different communicable diseases. And so I don't know that it would shift to the district or the school board. I would imagine what would happen would be the Department of Health in Tallahassee or CDC would change the recommendations as it relates to isolation and quarantine, and that would augment our processes of who we isolate and quarantine, when and how. So it wouldn't see a shift of responsibility. It would just change the guidance that we have.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you.
Well, and then too,
Yes,
again,
ma'am.
if we're going to be deciding, if we're going to be deciding who we quarantine or not, won't we have to know which ones are vaccinated? I mean, we're not going to be able to have a passport, but at some point, I think we have to take more than the student's word that, yeah, they got their vaccination, or the teacher's word. I mean, when we start quarantining people, after they've had the shots. I don't know if that's come up yet.
So the health department has access to that information. So the process works now, when we have a case or contacts, in this situation particularly relates to teachers, that once we get those contacts from the Jody and his team with the district, we can look them up. If they tell us they've been vaccinated, we can look them up in Florida Shots, confirm that they've actually had the vaccine, that it's been 2 weeks, and then not recommend quarantine in that situation.
So you've got the records for all of Florida, not just Sarasota County?
That's correct.
Thank you.
In the state of Florida, a vaccine system, monitoring system called Florida Shots exists. So any vaccine provided by a medical provider in the state of Florida, and specifically these COVID vaccines, have to be entered into that system.
Thank you. Bridget?
Mr. Edwards, I know you jumped off. Do you want, I can defer to him.
No, he's on the queue to come back.
So one of the questions, and I know Dr. Asplin mentioned this, was as far as the contact tracing, and that is, from our viewpoint, there's the safety and then there's the operational and effectiveness of not, trying to minimize the disruption. And so to my understanding that as it stands right now, as you mentioned, Department of Health runs point on, the contact tracing. I know with great support from our district staff, but as it pertains to what those protocols are those guidelines, or are they hard and fast requirements?
So the isolation and quarantine process are hard and fast. They fall under, I believe, the Florida General Statute 64D3. And so the guidelines are really the time frames, but the actual isolation and quarantine process is put on the health department through 64D3.
Okay. No, thank you for that clarification. That's very important. The other thing is, and I think going back to what Mr. Dumas said, and I thank Dr. Gordillo for providing that from a subject matter expert, and I would agree, as I mentioned before, is signaling to the community where we see us going. Certainly nothing is guaranteed in life, we know that. And so we have the ability to continue, and I believe we would continuously evaluate it and shift accordingly in the event, God forbid, it goes a different direction. So I'm encouraged to hear that. But again, I think then moving to the operational standpoint of, Dr. Asplund brought this up, and I know Mrs. Brown said this, as far as how do we try to, what does it look like for our students in the event we contact trace or staff? And so if you look at our dashboard, that's where you really start to see the bloat in numbers. And so then you think about the disruption. When I go back to other communicable diseases that the Department of Health traces, and would do quarantine, can you give me some other, and I tried to pull it up really quickly, what other diseases would be under that vein?
So the majority of them are going to be vaccine preventable diseases. So things like measles, mumps, chickenpox, pertussis. In certain situations, we might recommend individuals be excluded from school. But the big ones are measles and chickenpox, just because of their infectious nature. We want to exclude children from school while they're contagious. Many other diseases, something like salmonella or E. coli, gastrointestinal diseases, we're usually going along the lines of, once someone is symptom-free or no longer contagious, they're fine to come back to school. COVID's a little different, as we all know, but the big ones are going to be the rash illnesses, because of their ability to rapidly spread and potential for severe outcome, especially in young children.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, just the one thing I wanted to bring up was the staff, Mr. Edwards. I know I mentioned that also to Dr. Asplund, and I believe you had, and I'm not sure if you had a conversation with union leadership or reps, but I know I had previously, months ago, spoken with the union as far as the comfort level, and I think it was contingent upon, as we see more and more people get vaccinated, there's a psychological aspect to it as well that plays a very important role, but I do think it would be imperative that we hear from them and what their comfort level is, however we do that, because I think all stakeholders need to be a part of this decision. But so I would like to fit whatever the best mechanism to do that. But as it pertains to summer school, I know we talked about that. Is the mask going to make a difference or not? I think it's imperative to know that. I do have major concern with extending it and people not recognizing it solely for summer school and the ripple effect that could have. That's the only other side of that topic that I would
We'll make it date specific, I'm sure. Jane?
Well, I know that in the community and in the state, we have anti-vaxxers and we have anti-maskers, and they're in the same category oftentimes. But what I'm finding in my discussions with community members, parents, and students is that we really have four components of this that they're concerned with. One is the shield, 2 is the mask, 3 is concurrent instruction, and 4 is quarantine instruction. So I think these are the 4 pieces that we need to concentrate on. And in talking to students, I was led into a classroom of high school students who gave me a presentation on why they hated shields. Yeah. And they sat me behind, on row 3, behind a shield, and had me look up at them at the front of the classroom, and I couldn't like this. And it really, it certainly proved a point to me, but I would hope that shield would be the first thing to go. Some of them have gotten scratched and have been used heavily for almost a year. So I bring that one up because that would be a win for us. And then look carefully at masks based on the numbers and the spike and wait on that a little bit. But my concern is, yes, remove concurrent teaching, hopefully, because I think our teachers can't handle another year of this. But what do we do when a student is quarantined for however many days that is? How do we handle that quarantined instruction model? So that's it for me.
Dr. Drennan, do you have any comment on, if some teachers wanted to put the shields down now, if that would be appropriate or not?
Well,
you never really approved them in the first place, did you?
I think my initial comments and comments have always been, any barrier between you and another person who's positive is a positive case that is beneficial to reduce a transmission. But I think, the real thing we want to look at here is, at least from what the CDC's recommendations have been, masking, social distancing, that distance greater than 6 foot, although I know it's changed to 3 foot now, the contact still is within 6 feet, and then hygiene, hand hygiene. So I think as long as the mask, at this time, masking is still in place, we're still maintaining distance and hand hygiene is a focus. I don't think it would be any issue if you transitioned away from the barriers.
And I think the teachers, to say blanket across the board, because we don't know what it looks like in each classroom. And, perhaps if, so I don't know if we're willing to bend on the shields in certain cases if the teachers are, because I know it's hard to hear the younger kids. I'm seeing Dr. Brennan nod here. So, Dr. Brennan, would you like to?
Yes.
Dr. Aspley.
Yeah. So am I hearing this correctly? Where we know that the mask policy, which has the shields in that policy, sunsets on June 30th. Am I hearing the fact that you would like to see the shields come down now, or are we talking about next year? Are we talking about the summer? What timeline are you talking about on shields? Because we can make that happen anytime.
Now.
I'd say now, if the teachers are comfortable. I mean, if the teacher still wants them up in her classroom, whether I think they should stay. But I would hope most of our teachers have been vaccinated.
So shields would be an optional situation then at this point in time, which we can make that clear if that's what we all.
Do we have to change the policy to do that?
I don't think
Is that in the policy?
It's in there. It is in the policy.
The policy just requires that for a mask break, you have the shields in place, I believe. So I'm going to jump to it now just to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, you look that up. Tom?
Great discussion. Good room. Chatty. Couple things. I really do appreciate Dr. Gordillo making that statement through Mr. Dumas, because that's where I was headed, and I think it's right to signal to the community. The second piece of this, and I've heard this again, just listening to everyone in the community and at the schools, there's two schools of thought. I mean, our positivity rate within the school system has always been lower than the community rate. And one school of thought that we've heard is, well, then get rid of all of it because we don't need it. Well, the reverse of that is our mitigation efforts probably kept us safer. And so there's both sides of that argument. The second thing that I would suggest in terms of being concerned about how the policies are being perceived, particularly around summer school, my recommendation is to let the policy run out and then establish a new policy that is for a period of time, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, so that it's very clear to the public that it's only for this period to this period, and that and like everyone else, I'm ready to open school year normal, ready to go, but can we look at it again in July and make sure that our thoughts are exactly the same? One last thing that I'd like to throw out for discussion, since everyone is in that mode, particularly for the public, can we talk about Mr. Corcoran's policy for how the mask policy would be for the new year, the new school year?
Do you want to address the letter that he sent us in case there's anybody out there that doesn't know?
So the letter that Commissioner Corcoran sent to us was that he was basically letting school districts know that he thought that all the school districts should not mandate masks going into next school year, and would be more of an optional type situation.
Seems like we're on that page.
Karen?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. You referencing summer school and the sunset of our current policy being June 30th and alluded to the teacher perspective for those 2 weeks. And I would be very interested in that being validated because I don't think that if I've heard correctly that there's been anyone sitting on the dais that has been able to validate actually how our teachers do feel. And in particular, since we appear to be in a potential transition mode looking at next year, I think that small group of teachers needs to have input through their representation to really clarify, are we reading it correctly?
No, and if I can add to that, and Ms. Rose, I agree, and that's exactly the conversation we had about 3 weeks ago, which was we think it would be best, or the recommendation that I was going to bring was, yes, let's go ahead and let the policy sunset June 30th. We'll be halfway through. We'll be halfway through summer school at that point, but June 30th seems to be the date. And as you said, Ms. Ziegler, let's not complicate the issue. We want everybody to be very clear on this policy, which is sunsetting on June 30th, and then we move forward. And we talked about, making it optional the rest of the second half of summer school. The thought process there was, if it is optional second half of summer school, we can kind of see how that goes and have some more information, some more data from that as we decide eventually what we're going to do for next year. So same conversations. The only thing that that caused me to bring up the other side of that, to extend it, was two things. Number one, just the recent increase in the percentage. We started talking about that. And then number two, we're having a difficult time finding teachers. And I don't know, I couldn't sit here and tell you if that has anything to do with it. I think teachers are worn out. I think they want their summer. I think that. But what I don't want to do is place an additional barrier while I'm trying to get more teachers in to help us with summer school. I don't want to create an additional barrier that they might say, well, if you didn't have if you had masks, then I would, and that kind of thing. And I know what you're saying. Treat it more on an individual basis, talk through that. I get that.
Not necessarily.
No? Okay.
Not necessarily. I would like to validate that our thinking is accurate. Under the impression that we've had a significant amount of teachers get vaccinated, and with that comes transition of thought relative to the pandemic. I would just like to validate where we are and not assume where we are, because given all the conversations we've had up here, it could work potentially for some folks opposite of what you're saying.
Sure, that is correct.
And is it just because, do we need to look at the benefit of teaching summer school and masks have nothing to do with it? What is the benefit of pushing yourself beyond the challenges that a pandemic school year has placed on our staff as a whole? And perhaps look at it from that angle and not assume that it's mask or no mask. And I'm not saying in any fashion. I would just like to validate our thinking if we're making decisions.
I agree with that. I'm finding it hard to believe that teachers who are probably vaccinated now would make a decision on the summer based on the mask or no mask. In fact, I would think there's a lot of them that would rather have no masks now because they've been a bit of a problem or distraction in the classroom, and it's been harder to hear with the masks. I think if we're having problem getting summer school teachers right now, it's because A, we've got more students we're looking at, and B, because we've had this shortened summer break. So, we might have to go to a plan B on that. And I was ready to say, we're ready to, let the policy expire, but I am a little concerned that we are up to 6.8% now. I know when we started with the mask policy, I was looking at, 3 to 5%. And we're above that now. So for me to say, I don't want to reinitiate a policy for next year, I'm not ready to make the decision for next year yet. I'm ready to let this expire, but I'm ready to come back if this positivity rate increases, if we're seeing more kids getting it, or some other issues, in the variants that, the vaccine isn't working. I'm ready to come back and do it, an emergency meeting and have it done. But 8.8% gives me some pause, but I am ready to allow it to expire on June 30th and see what happens. But I think as we go forward next year, the shield's the mask, but it's that education for those kids who will be out of school for quarantine. I mean, that's, I know concurrent teaching is a problem, but, these are 2 weeks at a time we're asking these kids to stay out of school. We need to provide education to them. I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but I think maybe we need to get some heads together to come up with ideas, because perhaps we might have more quarantines if we don't have masks. And I think also on a school-by-school basis, I mean, what might be happening at Northport High isn't the same thing that's happening at Ashton Elementary. I mean, so a district-wide policy might not be what we need. I mean, we might ask the parents or the students, at a school, we want you to come back with masks. And I also think that parents may want to consider, flu season's here. We're seeing the flu go through Philippi Shores. You might want to put a mask on your kid, to keep, because our flu numbers were down this year. I mean, so I would think we might be more like what happens in some other countries, and for different times of the year, even for allergies, you might want to be putting your mask back on. But I think it might be, as we say, on an individual decision or a school decision, or they might encourage someone to do it. But I'm ready to let it expire, but I'm also ready to come back if this 6.8% keeps increasing, because I want to see it under 5% when school starts. I'll be done with my, get off my, Karen, did I call on you already, or Bridget? Who was next?
Again.
Karen?
I just want to zone in on quarantine and try to look at it as a separate instructional challenge. And the way that we have gone about it, for the most part, the remote does not work for the majority of students and families, not to say that it hasn't on some occasions. I think that coming from an educator perspective, there are different ways to approach that and solve that challenge, and not necessarily let it be about blanket mandates. For example, just throwing something off the cuff of, you've got a teacher doing remote teaching in person concurrently with teaching students online. If you have a teacher planning with teachers at a grade level subject area, they could provide remote and follow the same instructional plan and give it credibility. Obviously, it's not exactly the same because you're talking about two different instructors, but you could certainly do it in a credible fashion. I think that is something to venture into, and not let the quarantine variable alone take us away from what I think, if I hearing everyone correctly, the goal is to move with caution, be ready to revisit, but look towards the optimistic, open up with as much as normal as possible. So I'd like to separate out the quarantine issue and try to tackle it separately.
Well, yeah, because, and then too, it comes back down to, it's the teacher's responsibility to educate that student. And if the teacher can get the lessons to the student for this 2 weeks, in a practical way, that doesn't require a concurrent, or maybe a teacher might want to do concurrent, but I think it might change depending upon how the teacher wants to provide those lessons to those kids.
There's a variety of ways, and I'm sure we've got the skills and talent in our instructional staff to look to them for their expertise of how to solve those issues. I'm extraordinarily confident that we could arrive at a place where quarantine doesn't drive us as a school system or drive how we serve our community as we monitor the numbers.
Right. Dr. Asplin?
Yes, no, I agree with that. We don't want the quarantine to drive anything. Especially going into next year, not having the concurrent instructional model. I think that's definitely something that we need to do next year and go through that with caution. At the same time, I know what you're saying. There might be, depending on the different schools, there might be teachers who, and I've talked to a couple who actually like the remote learning piece. But I certainly would not make that mandatory for any teacher going into next year. But if an elementary teacher, for instance, at a particular school enjoys that, then maybe they are the go-to person if you're in a bad quarantine situation. Remember, quarantine situation might be 7 to 10 days at a time. And then that teacher might be able to help you out with that. In the secondary world, it's very, very difficult because of the certifications that are required for all the different classes. So that makes it very difficult. But also remember our past practice. When a student was sick, they might be sick for a couple of weeks and they come back and make up their work. And so we also have that, our regular policies. But if we had certain teachers who want to help students who might be out for a quarantine situation, that's one thing. I definitely don't want to mandate that. I want the teachers to know that we next year plan to go into a situation where it's just like a normal year and no concurrent teaching. But again, it'll be a case-by-case basis. We'll have to work through those, and I certainly can do that. But we don't want quarantine to drive what we do. I would agree with that 100%. And then the good thing about the sunset, we're still a couple months away. So we'll see how the percentages go. And it sunsets on the 30th. We can make a decision. We can always come back and make an emergency decision if we had to do something last minute. I know that when we write policy, we try to do that a good month and a half out so that we can hear it and then put it on the board packet and, vote on it and so on and so forth. But in an emergency situation after June 30th, we can certainly look at it at that point once it sunsets. So that's certainly an option. But making the mask optional, I think everybody wants that. Everybody sitting up here wants the mask to be optional. But at the same time, we have to keep a close eye on the percentages to make those good decisions that we need to make for our students and our employees. So,
thank you. Bridget?
Thank you. Mrs. Rose, you completely, literally what I wrote down was exactly what I was thinking as well, as far as, so I believe that we can't drive, concurrent in my mind needs to go. I understand why we did it, but at the end of the day, our goal is to provide high quality education and instruction. And we know that has been an impediment on a number of fronts. And so, and not because our teachers were incapable of it. I mean, they rose to the occasion, but their professional expertise was that this was just unsustainable. So in my mind, I think going to what Mrs. Goodwin brought up, and I think that, thank you for doing it, bulleting it out of the key components we should walk away today with is, from a signaling standpoint, dust shields. I think they should go. That's my personal opinion. I know you were looking at the policy there. Face masks, letting it sunset, but continuously evaluating it in the event we turn to a different, get to a different phase, and removal of concurrent, and with, as a caveat, understanding that because to Mr. Drennan's point, that quarantines are still under effect as far as, Department of Health standards, that we may have, and if you look at our numbers, we may have a continuation of, large amounts of students at various stages having to quarantine. And so my request would be, and this is very much of what I think Mrs. Rose was mentioning, is putting together an instructional plan from our experts in our district who are amazing as to how you would respond to that, and then what resources and supports do we as a board need to provide to allow that to be effective. But recognizing And I think it's really important that from our staff, as particularly the educators, know that this board is saying we will not continue with concurrent, not ambiguous, but and I want to make sure that that's approved by everyone up here, but I think that's very important, very powerful, because if it's gray, I think that's going to be problematic for us. I think that sending that signal that we know it doesn't work, but in the event of quarantine, let's try to find, creative models that as a result of COVID, that we learn through virtual learning, et cetera. I mean, there have been upsides of this current moment that we figure out a solution to that. And so those are my takeaways that I think will make a big impact in moving forward.
Jody, did you find anything about the shields in the policy?
Yeah, I think we'd be absolutely fine if you want to transition away from shields immediately and then have the mask policy sunset. I think you'd be absolutely fine in doing that if that's the direction of the board today. And then just in terms of the conversation as we move into next year and we start talking about contact tracing, I think the big focus then will be for us to make sure we continue to focus on at a school level all the things that impact contact tracing, right? So continue to try and maintain cohorts of students so that we're not mixing a lot of kids, continue to try and social distance as much as possible. So when we do have a positive, there are less people impacted by the contact tracing event. And I think a focus on that, if we still have contact tracing from the health department moving forward, a focus on that going into next year will help us minimize the number of students impacted by a positive person on campus. So I think that'll be key as we transition to next year to try and make sure we minimize those kids that have to be sent home.
Jody, and would you advise these teachers to throw out these shields or to keep them in case we need to put them up again, or at least give them back to the district, or whatever would you think we should do with these shields?
So I think, and certainly I'll look to Chris Renoff and Laura Kingsley and certainly Dr. Asplin on how we want to do that. But my thoughts at this point is we'll collect them. We'll store them somewhere just in case things change and we need to use them again. And we'll weed out those that have been scratched and dented and whatever. But I think we'll kind of collect those in some kind of a manner and make sure we hold on to them for now. And we see what the future holds.
And if any teacher still wants to keep her shields up or his, let them do it if they want to. Thank you. And we have Karen.
Yes, I just want to make a clarification that I'm in full agreement with looking at models that are unique to schools as we have challenges potentially, hopefully not, and when we hit the fall. But that we look to the teachers in those schools, and as Mrs. Ziegler has said, to, as a board, provide them with the support that is needed, and that we not try to push down what we think will work, but listen, because they have been in classrooms with our students and providing that instruction. So I just wanted to make that clarification. I'm very much in agreement with some flexibility and the reason that I think this is important right now, because schools are beginning to look at scheduling for the fall and building those kinds of thought processes into what potential options might look like at the different levels. As you mentioned, Dr. Asplin, may have different challenges. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing, shields can go down. Don't throw them out. The district will collect them. We're looking at allowing the mask policy, mandatory mask policy, perhaps to sunset on June 30th, perhaps to extend to, through summer school. And we will be coming back, depending upon what those numbers are for next school, if we have to reinstate it. And that for teachers, it looks like we will not have mandatory concurrent teaching. And as Karen says, I think each teacher should be able to decide how they're going to provide that education to those students who are quarantined. And will there be there to provide services? But I don't know that we'd have to do it on a district level, or if that should be done by the school teams, to let them decide how they're going to provide that education. I mean, I don't know that we need to get involved in that, or does somebody want to get involved? I mean, I would think so. The school
I think we can, we can handle that. I mean, even before COVID times, when a student was out sick, teachers were allowed to have discretion on how the makeup work was going to happen and what.
Yeah, but they didn't have the numbers that they have
and so
now.
on and so forth. So we can work through that, at our school sites.
Yeah, and we'll provide what support they need. Tom?
Do we have to vote on the shields? No.
No.
Okay, so the other thing too that I just am a little concerned about of optional shields is parents being upset that their child is in a classroom with shields I would think that by this point that we can just eliminate shields. That would be my recommendation.
Well, I would think they might come in handy come flu season. I don't know.
So that's a good point, Mr. Edwards. You are correct. We will have many, many phone calls from different people depending on whether they have shields still on their desk or not. The other question we'll probably get from principals, because I think we need to run this through our principals as well, is shields at lunchtime. I know that they've felt that those are very effective because the students have their masks off and they're eating and so forth. And so if we decide here that we are going to eliminate shields altogether, that's one thing. If we're going to make it optional, I know that's going to be a question with the principals. Do I make it optional at lunch? Do I not? You're going to have principals, even principals with different ideas about what they should do at their schools. So there could be some confusion there. So
And I think it does school by school, perhaps classroom by classroom. And if parents aren't happy, they could pick up the phone and talk to the teacher or the principal.
how do the rest of you feel about that? I'm not sure. I think that's going to take a lot of time away from what we're doing when we start fielding that number of phone calls, because I know we will get.
You think there'll be a lot?
I think there will be. I mean, it's a guess. But
Clarification, are we talking, and I guess it doesn't particularly matter, but are we thinking that there'll be pushback that they want them to remain, or that they don't want them and a instructor wants them to remain?
Both. All the above.
Well, my personal opinion is that this is where it's harder, where it's, you don't want to, I want the autonomy to be there, but I also don't want to create more work where they're fielding some of these. And I think some of these things do fall on our shoulders, and we got to be held accountable to them in that way. But I also, I think right now we require them. So we're no longer going to require them. If we feel, and I would defer to you or Dr. Kingsley, or as far as, from the administration level at the school-based level, if they feel that they're getting bombarded and we need to make it an official position from a board standpoint, then so be it. But, I tend to defer to, I like the autonomy at the school level. I just think going down to the classroom level, it would be very challenging. Not that I don't think, and please, Mrs. Rose, tell me your thoughts, because you've been in this trenches and seen it that way.
Let me give you an example of why we need to leave it at a teacher or classroom level. I am aware of a teacher who has treatments every 6 months and is not able to get the shot until mid-May. This teacher may want to keep those shields up because her, until the end of the year, so that, there's that protection. And we don't know what else is out there on the teacher level. So, I would think that, if for some reason there's special circumstances for a class, I don't want to say, no, get rid of them. You can't have them.
Oh, I agree.
I want to allow it to be optional if it needs to be.
I just stand out that they're not required as a board. That's.
They're not required, but they can be if needed.
Does Dr. Kingsley have input? I'm seeing body language that might indicate such.
Yes.
So
Dr.
I
Kinsley?
just want to add that my guess is that the administrators are going to want a decision made. I don't think anybody wants to stand alone and deal with that alone. And I just want to reinforce what Dr. Asplund said. I also have just a question. It's in policy about breaks. So I just want to make sure when we say it's not required and the board is not voting on that we're okay legally.
Yes, absolutely. I think that at the end of the day, they can still take breaks. There just will be no shields in place during those breaks. And I agree with Dr. Kingsley that at the end of the day, it's going to be very difficult for a teacher and or an administrator to try and walk the line of why some shields are up and some are down. I think that's going to be very difficult and not a problem we can solve for them if there's not a true decision from the board on which way we're going, because we will never satisfy why one shield is up and one shield is down. That's going to be the difficult job moving forward if we don't do something district-wide.
One thing we can do is since we're going to gather some information about summer school, we can gather some information before our next board workshop and get the thought on that to see if shields, we can just continue on with shields until we get some more information and then go from there. Or we can just decide right now we're not going to have them and that's just the way it is. And then we go and we send that out there and then we're shields.
And I would oppose taking all the shields down. I don't mind some of them going down, but I do know that there are medical reasons that they may want to be up. They may not be. I mean, I haven't talked to this teacher about it, but I know when you take the mask off and you've got mask breaks and there's no masks and then the shields are there, when we're at a 6.8%, I'm a little concerned. Although, if there's a class that, they hate the shields, they knock them down, they don't use them, I surely don't want to go after that teacher for taking it down.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think when we're talking about opening up, because of the quarantine issue, I don't think we can open up just normal. I think we have to let normal light, because when you're talking about assemblies and some of those other things, are we ready for that yet? Because those are other things we have to look at for next year. I know we're talking about masks and shields right now, and I think there's one thing, on 6:30, and I surely don't want to take away masks now. A little bit concerned about taking down all shields, because there may be instances where for one reason or another, the teacher hasn't been able to get her shot, or with the 6.8% out there, when those masks are off and they don't have the shield up, I'm a little concerned. I may be overly concerned, but I also think that as we're thinking these things about next year, we need to be thinking about assemblies and all those other things when we're talking about quarantine situations, because it's not going to be exactly as it is. I think it's going to be normal light. And I know I've thrown a few things in there. Karen?
Can we revisit the Department of Health and shields in addition to masks, and in a classroom situation, as well as, because not everybody has to take off their mask in a break, as well as in the cafeteria when the majority of masks are off to eat and staff is supervising as we attempt to have a transition towards normal. I think it's good to continually circle back and get input from our community stakeholders.
So from the health department's perspective, as I said earlier, the masking and the distancing, hand hygiene are the three methods that we focus on and we encourage. I would say in a situation, depends on how long that break is in the classroom, less than 15 minutes, it's probably not a significant issue. At least that's what we've seen so far. 15 minutes within 6 foot is what drives our identifying a contact in the quarantine process. The lunchroom's a little different. The barrier is going to help, but it's not the end-all be-all. So I understand the difficult decision, but our primary focus, barrier or not, is if someone is within 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes, that's going to be a contact for us. If that situation doesn't exist, then they're not going to be a contact. There's a break, it's a short break from the mask. I don't think that's going to be a big deal. I know lunch, it's probably a little bit longer, or right around 15, 20 minutes. That may be a different story, but once again, it's not going to change the recommendation as far as who gets quarantined in that situation in the lunchroom.
Bridget?
This is more technical. So to Dr. Kingsley's point, I do think as we move forward, whether we determine that's the board level or that the school-based level from the desk shields, that we may need to check with our general counsel that we may need to amend it, because if we were to remove them completely, just hypothetically, they say they're not required and they can't be used. I'm just giving that as an example. Then I pivot over to, but for the continuation of the school year, students will still continue to wear masks, obviously, because it doesn't sunset until June 30th. So they won't be having any mask breaks. That's one avenue, I suppose. But I would argue that our mini breaks are less than 5. So as it reads in our policy, it's mini breaks are 5 minutes or less. So they would not be technically contact traced. I mean, they would not be considered a close contact at that point. Desk shield or no desk shield, mask or no mask. Am I correct on that?
That would be correct.
Okay. So just whether or not we need to strike that or not, we can check with Mr. Duggan.
So the other option, and maybe the cleaner option, is because we're throwing around a lot of kind of things that we might do, and that gets very difficult to communicate. The other thing we could do is just leave the masks and the shields in place, let everything sunset June 30, and we transition at that particular time. That keeps it nice and clean. Everything stays as is for the rest of the year, and there's not a lot of confusion in communication. So I would just throw that as another option, which just keeps it real clean and easy to communicate. And there's not a lot of decisions about, desk shields here versus not here. I think that gets really confusing. And again, if I understand wanting to let individual teachers make that decision, that just gets very tough for us at the district level to try and justify to parent A versus parent B why we're doing this and not that. So maybe if you would consider a cleaner option is just everything sunsets June 30. That's a reset. And we look at that moving forward over the summer if things change.
And if I may, I would agree with Mr. Dumas on this one, and after listening to what Ms. Ziegler just said, and she brought up the part of the policy that talks about shields and their relationship to masks during breaks, that's going to throw a huge confusion factor into this. If we allow shields to be taken away, now we have the big question, we allow breaks or not allow breaks. Guarantee you teachers will not allow breaks at that point because they don't have the shield, because it says in the policy they have to have a shield to be able to have the break. So if we were going to do, I think it's going to come down to one of two things. Either we allow it to ride out the way the policy stands until June 30th, or if we want to do something with shields, I think it is going to require a change in policy, which would require a vote. We just can't mix and match or take pieces out of the policy and then have everyone really understand. And then the communication behind that would be very, very difficult, as you said, Jody. So I say we either change the policy and revote on it, or we let it sunset on the 30th.
And just from a timing standpoint, we'd have to advertise it as 30 days. We'd be looking at mid-end May at that point. I do think you raise a good point of communication. I'd love to see them go as quickly as possible, but if the actual implementation would be only a couple of weeks and confusion at the same time. So I would be fine with keeping it until letting it all pass till June 30th.
I agree at this time. Because it's not just how the teachers feel, but there's parents who let their kids go back to school, after, the winter break, or even some of them after spring break. And if they're saying, ooh, now you're taking away the shields during face, mask breaks, I won't be comfortable, because it's not just that 5 minutes, it's the total of the time throughout the day. So if they had 5 minutes here and then lunchtime and then 5 minutes there, they're over their 15 minutes. It could be.
It's continuous. Continuous. 15.
Well, I don't know if it's continuous. I thought it was added. Michael, does it have to be continuous, or if it's 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there?
It's cumulative, so it's within a 24-hour period. So it could be 3 instances of 5 minutes would account. That would be assuming that they had contact with that case. So in the classroom, they may be next to the case for 5 minutes when they have the break, but at lunch they sit with another groups of kids. Complicates the tracking process further, just showing how much hard work Jody and the district team have done. But yeah, it would be contact to a case, cumulative 15 minutes within a 24-hour period.
All right. So if a teacher is giving students the mask breaks, they need to keep those shields up. Any other questions, comments? we need to get ready for our meeting that starts at 3 o'clock. I think we've had a good discussion on this, and we've thrown a lot of ideas together, and we still have some things to think about before school starts. So thank you, Jody, and thank you, Dr. Drennan. And we stand
Please,
adjourned.
just regular Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
You're very welcome.